The year is 1470. Somewhere deep in the mountains of Thessaly, a bell rings across a valley for the very last time. Inside the ancient walls of St. Catherine's convent, 23 women are kneeling on cold stone, their lips moving in the same prayer they've spoken every single morning for years. But something is different today. The words don't feel the same. They taste like ash. They taste like endings. Beyond those walls, the sky glows red, and it isn't the sunrise. It's the banners of an empire that has already swallowed kingdoms whole. The Ottoman army doesn't march like ordinary soldiers. It moves like floodwater, like something that cannot be stopped, erasing everything it touches. Sister Elani, the abbess, holds a silver crucifix that has passed through 3 generations of hands. Her fingers are trembling, but not from fear. She knows exactly what's coming. Every woman in that chapel does. What none of them could possibly know, what no mind could have prepared for, is that death would have been the kinder outcome. Because what happened next was never written into any history book you were handed in school. It was buried, deliberately erased, hidden beneath centuries of carefully maintained silence until now. What the Ottomans did to these women wasn't simple conquest. It was calculated, methodical, and historians are only beginning to fully understand the scope of it. If you've ever asked yourself why certain stories disappear while others get retold for generations, then stay with me, because this channel exists to dig into the archives the world tried to forget. Missionary letters, Ottoman state documents, testimonies sealed inside Vatican vaults. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single story we uncover. To understand what happened to these nuns, you first need to understand the machine that was consuming everything in its path. 17 years before this moment, in 1453, Constantinople had fallen, the jewel of the Christian world, a city that had stood for over 1,000 years, collapsed in 53 days of cannon fire and blood. The Hagia Sophia, once the greatest cathedral on earth, was stripped of its crosses within hours of the conquest. Its ancient mosaics were plastered over. Its bells were melted down. Within a week, the call to prayer was rising from the same domes where hymns had echoed for 9 centuries. Sultan Mehmed II stood in the nave of that sacred building and declared it a mosque, not simply because he needed a place of worship. He understood something most conquerors never grasp. You don't truly defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were. The Ottomans weren't only conquering territory. They were. The Ottomans weren't only conquering territory, conquering identity itself. When Mehmed turned his gaze westward toward the scattered remnants of the Byzantine world, what he saw were wounds that refused to close. Every church bell still ringing, every monastery still standing, every cross still casting shadows on conquered ground. Each one was a quiet declaration. The old world refuses to die, and every nun still praying in Latin was living proof that faith could outlast armies. So the Sultan made a decision. If they will not convert, they will simply cease to exist, not through massacre. Massacre creates martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written. Legends grow. The dead become eternal. The Ottomans had developed something far more refined than killing, something that left behind no songs, no stories, no memory at all. Erasure. By 1470, this strategy had been tested across the empire. Greek monasteries, Serbian convents, Armenian churches, they didn't burn them all. Some were converted, others simply abandoned. But the pattern never changed. First came the offer, then came the silence. The convent of St. Catherine, sitting alone on a hillside in Thessaly, far from any garrison or ally, was about to become the next test. But these women didn't know they were a test case. They weren't warriors. They were women who had spent their entire lives in silence and prayer. Their only weapons were rosaries. Their only armor was faith. Sister Elani had led the convent for 12 years. Before that, she had tended the sick in a village that no longer existed, swallowed by plague in 1448. She hadn't come to the convent to escape the world. She came to make sense of it. Sister Magdalena was 19 years old. She had taken her vows only 2 years earlier. Her hands still carried the chalices from her father's fields. She had joined after her family was killed in a raid. The convent was the only place she'd felt safe since. Sister Theodoris was 70. She had outlived 2 abbesses, 1 emperor, and more wars than she could count. She had stopped fearing death long ago. None of them had ever faced anything like this. The first cannonball strikes just after dawn. It doesn't hit the chapel, it hits the bell tower. The sound is like the world splitting open. Stone explodes upward. Iron screams against iron. The bell that has rung every morning for 140 years shatters mid-swing, and its pieces rain down onto the courtyard where the sisters grow herbs for healing. The same hands that tended those plants now press against trembling ears. Sister Elani doesn't scream. She rises, holds her crucifix high, and begins to sing the Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. One by one, the others join her, 23 voices rising against the thunder of an advancing empire. But empires don't listen to songs. By midday, the gates are broken open. Ottoman soldiers pour into the courtyard, not with drawn swords, with ledgers, quills, and ink pots. They move through the convent like clerks conducting an inventory, counting, recording, cataloguing. Because to the empire, these women are not people. They are assets. A translator steps forward, a Greek man who once lived in these very hills. His voice shakes as he reads from a scroll, and you can hear shame buried beneath every single word. By order of Sultan Mehmed II, all subjects of conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime Porte. Those who convert will receive protection. Those who refuse will face the consequences of rebellion. Sister Elani steps forward. Her face is calm, nearly serene. She speaks not to the soldiers, but to the translator, in Greek so clear that every ear in the courtyard catches it. Tell your sultan that we have already surrendered our lives to a different king. We have nothing left to give. The officer commanding the unit, a man named Hassan Pasha, whose name still appears in Ottoman military records from the 1470 Thessalian campaign, doesn't respond with anger. He responds with something far colder than anger. He smiles, because he knows something these women don't yet understand. The Ottomans have spent decades perfecting the art of breaking people without shedding a drop of blood. That nig. Hatch, the women are locked inside their own chapel. No food, no water, only darkness and the sounds of soldiers outside, laughing, eating, and living, while they wait to see which woman cracks first. 2 of the younger sisters from Corinth begin weeping in a corner. Their sobs roll through the stone chamber. But Sister Magdalena, barely 20 years old, begins to whisper a psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Then another. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Then another still, and slowly the weeping stops. This is the moment the Ottomans completely misjudged them. These women had spent their entire lives preparing for suffering, fasting night vigils in the cold, long hours of silence, submission to something far greater than themselves. What the soldiers intended as punishment, the nuns recognized as familiar discipline. But Hassan Pasha is patient. He has seen this before, in similar monasteries across the empire, among men of God who believed their conviction alone would protect them. Faith, he once wrote in a letter to the Sultan, a letter still preserved in the Topkapi Palace archives, burns brightest just before it dies. He intends to test that theory. On the second day, the doors open. A servant enters carrying bread and clean water. He sets it down without a word and leaves. The nuns stare at it. Their lips are dry. and cracked, their stomachs hollow. The younger sisters look to Elani with desperation in their eyes. Sister Theodoris, the eldest, speaks first. They want us to reach for it, to feel grateful, to soften. Elani nods once. Then we fast. They don't touch it. By the third day, their hands are shaking and their lips are bleeding. The youngest sisters can barely stand, but they don't break. Hassan Pasha watches from the courtyard with his arms folded. He is impressed, frustrated, and for just a moment, something that almost resembles respect crosses his face. But respect doesn't alter strategy. On the third day, he enters himself. He speaks through the translator. You are not criminals. You are not enemies. You are simply mistaken. The Sultan is a merciful man. He offers you new lives, new names, full protection. All you must do is speak the words. Silence. Or, he continues, you may accompany us to Constantinople. There the Sultan himself will hear your case. Perhaps your conviction will move him. He pauses, lets the suggestion settle. But the road is long, he adds, and the weak do not survive it. It isn't a threat, it's a promise. Sister Elani looks at her sisters. Some are barely conscious. Some are deep in prayer. Some stare at the floor, searching for strength in the cold stone beneath them. She turns back to Hassan. We will walk. The smile returns. Good, we leave at dawn. That nigh. The women hold one another in the darkness. No one speaks. But Sister Magdalena begins to hum softly, a hymn from Vespers. One by one the others join her. Outside, soldiers hear it. Some of them pause mid-conversation. Some look away. One of them, years later, will tell his grandson about the women who sang themselves toward death. But that story will be forgotten too. They leave at dawn on the fourth day. 23 women with their hands bound by rope, walking south toward the coast. No carts, no horses, only their feet, the dust, and a sun that shows no mercy to anyone. The soldiers don't rush them. They don't need to. The road is the punishment. On the second day, Sister Irene collapses. She's 62. Her knees have been failing for years. She tries to stand and her legs simply refuse. The soldiers don't stop to wait. Sister Magdalena and Sister Anna lift her between them and carry her for the next 3 miles. When they stop for the night, Irene is unconscious. By morning she is gone. They bury her at the roadside with their bare hands. No tools, no ceremony, only dirt and whispered prayers. The soldiers watch. They don't interfere. Hassan Pasha makes a note in his ledger. 22 remaining. On the fourth day, it happens again. Sister Callista, who hasn't spoken since the siege began, simply stops walking. She sits down in the middle of the road, closes her eyes, and doesn't get up again. They leave her there. By the time they reach the port of Volos 7 days later, only 18 remain. But something had shifted on that road. Something the Ottomans hadn't anticipated. The women had stopped weeping, stopped begging. They walked in silence, but it was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of women who had already made their peace. On the morning of the 7th day, Hassan Pasha summons Sister Elani to his tent. She goes alone. What happens inside isn't recorded in any Ottoman document. It's described in a letter written by a Venetian merchant who witnessed what came after. A letter discovered in 2003 in the archives of Dubrovnik. He writes that they brought her back at dawn, and she could not walk on her own. Her eyes were open, he says, but she was no longer behind them. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert, but when he passed close enough, he could see her lips still moving. She was still praying in Latin. Silently, she had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander somewhere they couldn't reach. This is the Ottoman strategy that history has quietly buried. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs become legends. They wanted ghosts. women who would walk and talk and breathe, but would never again be whole. Living proof that resistance was futile. Living warnings to every her community, watching from a distance. Sister Elani walked with them all the way to the coast. She never spoke again, never held anyone's gaze. She was present, but she was somewhere else entirely. If this story matters to you, if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Every single subscriber tells us that this work is worth continuing. At the port of Volos, they are loaded onto a galley, a warship built for control. Slaves, prisoners, cargo. The nuns are chained to benches with iron rings around their wrists. A ship's manifest discovered in 1987 at Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum lists them not by name, but by number. Religious captives, female 18 in total. Destination, imperial household. Purpose, domestic service and conversion. That word service is doing a great deal of work. The voyage lasts 12 days. The sea is merciless. Storms lash the deck. Salt spray cuts into cracked lips. The ship rolls violently, and these women, who have never seen the ocean, become sick until there is nothing left inside them. At night, Sister Magdalena whispers psalms beneath her breath, her voice barely audible above the crashing water. But the other prisoners chained alongside her, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, men and women from across the broken world, all turn their heads to listen. For a moment, just a moment, the sea seems to all quiet. When the ship finally enters the Bosphorus, Constantinople rises before them on the horizon. Dams and minarets, and ancient walls that seem to stretch beyond sight. The city gleams in the early light, like the edge of a blade. For centuries, it had been called the city of the world's desire. Now it would become their prison. They are marched through narrow streets past merchants and soldiers and other captives. People stop to stare. Christian nuns are a rarity, even in an empire built entirely on conquest. They are led past the ancient walls, through the imperial district, past gardens where fountains run and peacocks cry out, and then, in the shadow of the Hagia Sophia itself, that great cathedral turned into a mosque, they are made to stop and kneel. As the call to prayer rings out above them, one of the sisters whispers, "We are home, but it no longer belongs to us." They are taken to the palace, but not to any grand hall, not to any courtyard where ambassadors walk or ministers scheme. They are taken down stone steps that spiral into darkness, through tunnels that smell of damp earth and centuries, to a place that officially does not exist. Beneath the Topkapi Palace, there is a network of tunnels that no tourist ever sees. Storage rooms, servant quarters, forgotten corridors, winding through the bedrock like veins through a body. And in the farthest corner, sealed off for sea, injuries, there is a room with no official function. In 2011, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found stopped them completely. Scratched into the stone, barely visible after all those centuries, were crosses, dozens of them. Small, rough, carved with fingernails or broken fragments of pottery. And beneath them, etched in Latin, 4 words, Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, perhaps years, these women lived beneath the palace. Servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires for rooms they would never be permitted to enter. But at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in this forgotten room and prayed. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, only memory. They recited psalms. They could still recall verses half forgotten and reshaped into prayers that kept them breathing. They sang hymns in whispers so faint the stone could barely hold them. They held communion with bread taken from the kitchens, and water from the palace wells. And they carved their faith into the walls, one scratch at a time, knowing with absolute certainty that no one would ever see it. Sister Magdalena was among them, the girl who had whispered psalms on the ship, who had carried Sister Irene on that brutal road, who had refused to look away when they brought Sister Elani back, dressed in sat ilk. She became their voice in the dark. The archaeologists found her mark as well. A small bird scratched into the corner of the wall. Beside it, 23 lines, one for each sister, but only 11 lines were complete. The rest trailed off into nothing. They used pottery shards for candle holders. A scrap of salvaged linen became an altar cloth. From a fragment of shattered mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. Each night they gathered, and each woman knelt and shared a single memory: her home, her church bell, the warmth of bread before sunrise. These memories became their new psalms, small offerings to a God who still listened in the dark. A Venetian prisoner held in the palace for ransom in 1478 wrote of strange sounds rising through the floors, women's voices singing in Latin to a God not recognized by the empire. For centuries, historians treated it as superstition until they found the chapel. But here is the part that breaks something open inside you. The crosses stop halfway through the wall. The scratches grow erratic, desperate. Some lines are carved so deeply they suggest the hand pressing into stone was shaking, urgent, running out of time. And then nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 note a purge of palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone considered unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites. Just one line in a ledger written, in careful, precise Ottoman script: disposed. The nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history. 18 women who had walked 7 days through suffering, who had crossed the sea in chains, who had scratched prayers into stone in the dark beneath an empire, gone, but their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 recorded a rumor circulating among the older palace servants that on certain nights in the lower halls the air would turn cold, and if you listened carefully, you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as the foolish superstitions of uneducated servants, but the walls don't lie. When archaeologists examined the chapel closely, they found something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles, but from something older, mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made by hand in their convents, which means they kept their vigil far longer than anyone had imagined. Months, possibly years. Gathering night after night, carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing with everything left in them to simply disappear. Sister Magdalena's bird was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so lightly, it almost wasn't there. 2 words in Greek: we endure, and here is what matters. Here is why this story refuses to stay buried. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922, 600 years. 3 continents. It rewrote maps, languages, entire civilizations. It turned the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. It ruled from the gates of Vienna to the Arabian desert. It had armies, cannons, infinite resources, and the absolute will to reshape the world in its own image. And it could not erase 18 women who scratched prayers into stone with their fingernails. Think about that. An empire against women with nothing but faith and broken pottery. And the women left a mark that is still here, still visible, still speaking, long after every last sultan has turned to dust. But memory is written by the ones who refuse to stop. Sometimes survival looks like a cross carved where no one was supposed to see it. A prayer spoken in a language the conquerors tried to silence. A small bird scratched into stone so that the sisters who fell would not be forgotten. Centuries later, we found it anyway. In 2011, when the archaeologists stood in that hidden room and looked at those crosses, one of them asked a question that I haven't been able to shake. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of certain carvings suggests hands returning again and again to the same stone with desperate repetition, which means these women gathered night after night in total darkness, year after year, and refused to stop believing, even when sisters disappeared, even when the scratches on the wall stopped growing, even when every rational thought should have told them that hope was gone. They kept carving anyway. That isn't only faith, that is defiance in its most absolute and irreducible form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922, but those 4 Latin words are still there on a wall beneath Istanbul. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. If this story reached something in you, if you think these women deserve to be remembered by more than a handful of archaeologists and a forgotten archive, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel. Because there are hundreds more stories like this one, stories the world buried and that we are going to dig back up, one by one. They carved their prayers, trusting that someone, someday, would look back and find them. You just did.